Critical path method. The critical path method is the most common schedule management method used in predictive development approaches. It's a technique of schedule analysis in which the schedule activities are evaluated to determine the float or slack for each activity and the overall schedule. To calculate critical path, use the forward and backward pass, along with float analysis to identify all network paths including critical. Sequence mandatory critical path activities to find the longest path through a project, and also to determine the shortest possible project duration and the amount of flexibility in the schedule. Determine the length of each path in the diagram. The longest path is the critical path. Network diagram with date and dependencies. The first step would be to draw the diagram for the various activities, noting their predecessors with arrows. This will show the number of paths in the project. In this case, there are 4 potential paths: ACF, ADF, ADE, and BE. By adding up the length, durations of the various paths, the path with the longest duration is known as the critical path. Remember, though, that there can be multiple critical paths. If the length of other paths are very close in length to the critical path, those are identified as near critical paths, and will require monitoring by the project manager so they do not also become a critical path. The next step is to do the forward pass, to determine the early start, top left of the box, and early finish, top right of the box, date for each activity. Then perform the backward pass. The late start, bottom left, and late finish, bottom right date can be determined. The difference between the early and late dates is known as the float or slack for the activity. ES minus LS and EF minus LF. Activities on the critical path will have a float or slack of 0 days. To double-check on your forward and backward pass answers, the difference in days between the early and late start dates and the difference in days between the early and late finish dates should be the same number of days. Float. The difference between the early and late dates. Total float is within an activity. Free float is between 2 activities. Total float is the amount of time that a schedule activity can be delayed or extended from its early start date without delaying the project finish date or violating a schedule constraint. Free float is the amount of time that a scheduled activity can be delayed without impacting the early start date of any subsequent scheduled activity. Use early start, ES, early finish, EF, late start, LS, and late finish, LF dates for all activities. Early finish date, EF. The earliest possible point in time when the uncompleted portions of a schedule activity can finish, based on the schedule network logic, the data date, and any schedule constraints. Early start date, ES. The earliest possible point in time when the uncompleted portions of a schedule activity can start, based on the schedule network logic, the data date, and any schedule constraints. Late finish date, LF. The latest possible point in time when the uncompleted portions of a schedule activity can finish, based on the schedule network logic, the project completion date, and any schedule constraints. Late start date, LS. The latest possible point in time when the uncompleted portions of a schedule activity can start, based on the schedule network logic, the project completion date, and any schedule constraints.